Now from Hull, he's probably visiting John Prescott, the Conservative MP and former Shadow Home Secretary David Davis. Welcome to the Daily Politics there. So there you heard it from the Home Secretary herself. Without this change in the law, paedophiles will continue to escape justice.
Yeah, it's always paedophiles and terrorists, isn't it? We had the same thing when we were looking at the extradition treaties under Labour. This is exactly, what she's proposing is exactly the thing we opposed in opposition when Labour brought it up. Now, let's understand. Of course, you have to allow the agencies to use intercept, and you have to allow them to use tracking and monitoring, which is what we're talking about here, checking who's calling who. But it should be done properly. It should be done under the control of a judge, a warrant and so on. You have to get a warrant before you do it. And if you do that, there's nothing to stop you doing all the things you talked about. It's following up on kidnappers and paedophiles and terrorists and organised criminals. But you've got to get a warrant first. What's proposed at the moment is that the state should be able to look at anybody's telephone calls, anybody's texts, anybody's emails, seeing who they're going to, not the content, seeing who they're going to, when they did it, where they did it from, without any control whatsoever. And that's just wrong. That's just that's completely at odds. It's like allowing your house to be searched by a policeman without getting a warrant first.
Is it your view then, are you claiming that this opens the door, if unamended and proceeds as the government plans, that we will be subject to mass internet surveillance?
Well, what they'll probably, what will tend to happen, and it's happened actually with every piece of terrorist legislation, is you get mission creep. So they had, for example, stop and search, counter-terrorism stop and search. We ended up with 250,000 stop and searches in Britain under counter-terrorism law. There's an awful lot of terrorists in Britain, clearly. And what will happen here is that you will find people will start doing data mining, looking to see whether they get certain types of people are making certain types of telephone calls. And that, frankly, is at odds with our judicial tradition and our whole approach. And bear in mind, apart from the sort of giving the state too much power, it also creates huge, what they call in the term in the trade, honeypots, great agglomerations of data which people can, people of ill will, shall we say, can dig into. Whether it's phone hacking on a grand scale, as we've been seeing with the Leveson operations, or whether it's policemen selling data, as we used to see with the Police National Computer. So you've got all sorts of other problems, as well as the increase in power of the state. And finally, it actually doesn't work terribly well. If you look at the 7/7 inquest or you look at the 9/11 Commission, the two big reports into counter-terrorism in both the major allies, what you find is it's not the lack of information that the agencies have, it's actually the lack of ability to use it. Our agencies had intelligence which they didn't use properly prior to 7/7, and the FBI, CIA and NSA had intelligence prior to 9/11. They didn't use it properly. So what this is going to do is add a whole load of haystacks to the needles they're looking for.
Well, let me ask you then to switch from advocacy to analysis and get your view of what you think has happened. Because looking at what the Prime Minister has done, or the coalition, and its commitment to civil liberties, it's ditched ID cards, which it said it would. It's cut back the DNA databases. It's reduced detention, stop and search powers that were designed for counter-terrorism. It's still, I think, restricted to restricting the use of CCTV is still one of its ideas. So if that's been where it's been coming from, what's happened here? Why have they now moved down this road?
Well, you're right, it had an absolutely saintly 6 months where it did all the things it was promising to do. Then it went through a sort of mediocre middle, and now it's gone into sort of Blairite phase. I mean, what's happening is that you've got, from the agencies, understandably, lots of demands, lots of pressures to get more powers. Happens all the time. It's a non-stop process. One thing that's changed, rather sort of subtle organisational change, is that under John Reid they brought into the Home Office a thing called the OSCT, the Organisation of Security and Counter-Terrorism. And instead of the Home Office being a sort of barrier and a check on the madder ideas, is now become an exponent of the madder ideas. And I'm afraid what's happened is both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have been persuaded by this. I mean, they're not particularly counter-terrorism experts, they're not surveillance experts. They get told lots of technical mumbo-jumbo and, you know, Prime Minister, we can't guarantee the safety from terrorism if you don't do these things. And of course, they go along with it. But I'm afraid it's going to have a very rough ride. I suspect this is going to have about as much survival chance as privatising Forestry Commission had.
Ah, well, that worked. Let me come back to you. Don't go away. Let me just bring in my guest here. Ian, I'm picking up on that point on the politics of this. I mean, it would seem to me that the coalition will run into some real trouble here. The Libertarian wing of the Conservative Party, as represented by David Davis there, will be clearly against it. Sounds to me he's going to vote against it. We'll find in a minute. And Mr. Clegg will get a rough ride from a lot of his Lib Dems too, will he not?
Politically, I can't see how they can make this work actually, and I think it does speak to that. It speaks to that tiredness that governments get after a couple of years, and as David was saying, you know, there's an allure of power, there's a glamour of dealing with the intelligence services, and it becomes easier because they think we're people of goodwill, and the people running the agencies are people of goodwill. We'll just start agreeing to this stuff. But I think they're about to run into a roadblock in the shape of David Davis and other Conservative MPs.
Where are you on this?
And the Lib Dems. But I just think it's much easier to be civilly libertarian in opposition. You get into government, your head is turned, particularly by the security services who've never bothered to talk to you before. Yeah. Exactly. And they all say, we really need more power, and you will be blamed if another terrorist attack happens on this soil on your watch. And you think, oh, well, you know, maybe I better give them more powers. You need to be robust in order not to, because after all, you know, the police and security services are always going to ask for more powers. You know, they'd want us all electronically tagged if they had the chance and listening to all our phone calls. And then goodness knows how many terrorist plots and paedophiles they'd be able to stop. You've got to be robust. And actually, if you're a proper, serious terrorist, you can get around this sort of surveillance anyway. You can get pay-as-you-go phones. You can keep changing your number. You can send messages to each other through internet scramble if you want to.
Virtual protocol networks which scramble your IP address and everything. Let me come back to the parliamentary business. This was David Davis. Can you give us an indication this morning of how many like-minded Tories there are on this with you?
Well, not yet. There'll be quite a few, I'm quite sure. But one other thing which is important to take on board is there will be a very, very big reaction from the internet community. I mean, I talked to one organisation, and within 4 days we had 137,000 people on the online petition against this, which is why I made the reference to the privatisation of Forestry Commission. When that came up, nobody argued about it for the first week or two, and then all of a sudden everybody got an onslaught of emails about it. People starting to realise what it meant and so on. And this will happen with this in spades.
But who are your political allies? You've got some Conservatives, you say, who will think like you. Do you have an idea of how many Lib Dems will side with you as well? And where is the Labour Party going to be on this?
Most of the backbench Lib Dems, I think, are naturally on my side on this. Funnily enough, when you and I last bumped into each other, it was actually after an Andrew Marr programme, and I was having breakfast with Ed Miliband, you may have noticed. And he seemed pretty sympathetic too. So I think, all told, there'll be quite a coalition against this unfettered proposal. I mean, it's entirely possible to cut it back down and put warrantry in it and put controls on it and so on to make it acceptable. But as it stands, I don't think it has a snowball's chance in hell.
And on the finally, just on the more general issue of the Queen's speech, which was that plus the visit to the Essex tractor factory with Mr. Clegg, which was meant to put the show back on the road. In general terms, has this Queen's speech put the show back on the road or not?
It's too early to tell. He's got some good bits in it. I mean, I quite like the enterprise bill proposals and the competition bill proposals and the banking separation. I mean, they're very similar to recommendations of mine from 2 years ago. So there are quite a lot of good bits in it. So I wouldn't write it off. But there are three parts: this, secret trials, and House of Lords, which is going to have a very, very rough ride indeed.
All right, David Davis, thank you very much, joining us there from our studio in Hull. Time now to take a look back